the host was so detached. This person just finished telling this very traumatic story, and the host was like, that was a great story, and then asked a completely unrelated question, and I was like, oh Lord, this person's gonna need therapy after this. Like,
it feels slightly illegal for a show called Monetize This to talk about ethics, but here we are. This is Monetize This, the podcast about podcasting and the strange economy we've all decided to participate in. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer. We are living in the golden age of be vulnerable. Tell your story, go deeper, be authentic, make people feel something. And at the exact same time, we're living in the golden age of ship fast, don't over-edit, repurpose everything, turn pain into clips, build the funnel, optimize the platform, scale the system. And these two value systems don't always coexist peacefully. Today, we're hearing from Tonya Pieske, not about microphones or download strategies, but about care. And what happens when podcasting advice, the efficiency advice, the business model advice, the guru advice, collides with human storytelling? Who is most podcast advice actually for? Because if you're building a revenue engine, a marketing channel, or a scalable media business, maybe that advice makes perfect sense. But if you're making something because you feel compelled to make it, if you're asking people to tell stories that cost them something, if you're not trying to turn it into a lifestyle brand or a beach in Bali exit plan, the math changes.
so I just released a podcast called How to Tell Someone just a couple of weeks ago, and it's a personal storytelling podcast. I invited my friends to tell a story about a time in their life where they had to communicate something really big or scary to someone, or something big was communicated to them. And we just kind of explore the relationships involved and how it impacted their life, how it still shows up for them today. And it's really the core of the show is about sort of being vulnerable and practicing radical empathy. There's no like villains and heroes. There's no rags to riches stories. It's just like the messy, complicated part of communicating and how really we're all pretty bad at it.
This episode is slightly more thoughtful than usual. Don't panic. We will still question the webinar industrial complex. But today we're talking about something that sits underneath all the grow your show in 30 days advice. And that's care. Let's get into it.
There's so much value in bringing in more vulnerability and authenticity into media. But yeah, if you don't have a playbook, or if you don't follow like basic ethics for how to handle guests that are being vulnerable and authentic, you're doing more harm than good, and it makes me angry. And it's not complicated, and there is sort of there's a pretty big divide between just a person in their home making a podcast, and then academics talking about trauma-informed processes, and there's a very big gap in between those two things, and there is middle ground to be found, and some of it is just like common sense, like how would you want to be treated if you were kind of opening up and being vulnerable? What kind of treatment would you want from a stranger to help you feel more comfortable? And some of that is really missing, I think, in the podcast space when it's becoming about content churn. It's kind of scary to me.
So what does doing it right actually look like?
There are some podcasts I've done where they do zero editing, where it's just like record and that's that. And if you're asking someone to tell a vulnerable story, it might be a good idea to offer some editing so that they can feel comfortable, saying what they want to say, knowing that it's not set in stone. There's just little things like that I think also go against some of the advice that podcasters, coaching podcasters will tell you. They're about efficiency. They're about the business model, and the sort of human interaction of it kind of gets lost, because it is faster and more efficient to just hit record. And you could say authenticity includes no editing. That's a pretty broad stroke, I would say. Like, I did a lot of editing on this show, and it was needed, because when you're telling a really deeply personal story, it's not often chronological, and you're bouncing all over the place. And so that, like, the time I invested in editing, a lot of professional podcasters would be like, that's a waste of time, you did it wrong. But there was no other way to do it. And as a result, all of my guests felt really comfortable knowing that I'm going to tweak some things, and I'm going to, I'm going to make them sound good and I'm going to clarify some stuff that was a little confusing coming out of their mouth. Like that's trauma informed. You don't need that for every podcast, but if you're investing in human storytelling and asking people to be really vulnerable and share stories that are difficult to tell, you got to put in the extra work. It's not good. It's not about efficiency. It's not about content churn. It can't be. Otherwise, it's unethical.
And this isn't just about production. It's about what we think we're even trying to create.
If something's really going to sink in and you're going to remember it and apply it, it has to be like human to human. I also come from the nonprofit world, so I'm like very familiar with this like terminology that is thrown around all the time in nonprofit, like impact. The word impact, like what does it mean to somebody outside of the nonprofit industry, or even people within your organization don't really know what you mean when you're talking about impact. It's like this really vague terminology that doesn't really transfer. But when you tell stories of the work that you're doing and how it's affected people, then impact makes sense.
Which is where the advice machine shows up.
You couldn't pay me to go to a webinar about how to be a good podcast guest. I think like also, I worked for a nonprofit for a long time that was focused on gender equity in STEM, and we did a lot of. I was surrounded by tech people, and I went to a lot of webinars and conferences, and I think I just developed this like really strong distaste for any kind of webinar or conference or in any field. They're mostly a waste of time, and just a sort of sales funnel for whoever's you're just giving them your email address so they can advertise to you for the rest of your life. That's what it feels like.
It's not just webinars, though. It's platforms.
And I watched the trainings on Podmatch because I wanted to understand how to use it, really. And really what I took from it is that they're really trying to build a sort of really tight-knit community where you're kind of you live and die on the platform. That's what it feels like to me, that Podmatch has sort of created their own little ecosystem so that like ideally you would be a guest and a host and you're kind of feeding it both ways. And they really, incentivize you to keep everything on the platform, make sure that you have your bookings listed on the platform so you get credit for them. And I'm playing by the rules. I'm doing it. I'm putting in, when I schedule bookings, I make sure that Podmatch knows about it. I did get connected with a handful of really good podcasts, yours included, really early on. And then they use some sort of AI matching to help you connect, with podcasts that seem to be aligned. And I would say about 2 weeks in, the matches made absolutely zero sense. It was like they got to the bottom of the barrel real fast for what I was looking for. And maybe that's just what I'm looking for is rare. I don't know. But ever since then, it really is the matches that they give me are so bananas. I'm like, there's absolutely no crossover here. And the AI summary of why we're a match are hilarious.
And then there's the thing everyone says you absolutely have to do.
I've never found a podcast through social media.
Right?
Ever. I have followed podcasts that I already listen to on social media, very rarely, because they'll talk about stuff that I'm missing on social media. Like we post pictures of our guests, like I listen to some storytelling podcasts and they're like, oh, we put a picture on Instagram of this moment of their story. Go take a look. And I'm like, fine. But it's not a way for me to discover podcasts. It's never been. And I think that's probably true for most people.
Underneath all of this, there's a dream.
But it's really appealing to think, oh, if I could just make this podcast work, I could quit my job. I could just work from home. It would be such a sweet deal. And that would be true. But, just go back to if it sounds a little too good to be true, it's probably not real. It's pretty simple. But also, I think like fundamentally, if you want to make a podcast, it should be because you want to make a podcast. Like ask yourself, do you actually want to make a podcast, or do you want to just be successful? And this is the way that you've heard you can do it. I don't know. It feels like it's going to suck the soul right out of your body to pursue a path that where like your core interest in it isn't actually the podcast, you know? Like that should be the first step. Do you actually want to make a podcast?
And what I love is she didn't start with a business plan.
First of all, this is the third podcast I've done. I did one in 2018 or 19 that was really just like for fun. Me and a friend, I was like, we could do. I know how to edit audio. I can do this. And immediately found out how much work it was, and was like, I'm done. I'm never doing this again. And I was like, it was just a classic case of like, we'll share the workload, so it'll be easy. But then I was like, but I'm the only one who knows how to do anything, and so I'm doing everything and building up resentment for my co-host, and that's not a good dynamic. So I was like, cut it off. I'm going back to making music, and I'm never making another podcast. And then 5 years later, I was like, what if we made a podcast, you guys? so then me and two other friends made another podcast, and the same thing. But this time I really thought, like, this one friend is a marketing person. Awesome. That's going to be helpful. And my other friend is a visual artist. And I was like, perfect. And he's got all these ideas about making illustrated videos for YouTube, like making little cartoon characters of us. And I was like, awesome. Yes. But then when the rubber hit the road, I was still doing all of the work. And I was like, okay, never mind. This was supposed to be fun. And I just picked up a part-time job. And then this time was so different. Those were just like silly podcasts where we're just, shooting the shit, talking about horror movies. This time I was high, first of all. I smoked a little bit too much. And then I was like, wouldn't it be funny to have a show called How to Tell Someone? But the kind of inside joke is that it's not a how-to. Like, you shouldn't actually be following any of the advice. Like, the point of the show is that we all kind of suck at communicating, and how damaging it can be that we're so bad at it, and we're still so bad at it. And I told a friend, and I was like, obviously, I'm never going to follow through on this. This is like a distraction from other things I should be working on. So I'm just telling you, this is a fun idea. Never going to do it. And all it took was her being like, you should do that. And I was like, you're right. I'm going to do it. I'm going to start tomorrow. I already have a logo. And that's how it started. But then it quickly evolved into this other thing. And that's why I'm like so repulsed by the sort of like how to build a business with podcasts, how to market your podcast, because it's so divorced from why I'm doing this podcast and what I'm getting out of this podcast. And I'm like, can someone just talk to me like a human and tell me like what would give me the most bang for my buck to get the word out about my podcast? That's all I want. I'm not trying to make money with it. I don't want to have ads on my podcast. I just feel so compelled to spread the word, because these are really good stories and stories that people can relate to and will make you cry in a good way. And they're my friends who are like brave and vulnerable, and I owe it to them to like share their stories and not just release it into the void like every other musical project I've ever done that I just release and then move on to the next thing. And yeah, so a lot of this advice is just like it doesn't fit. And like you said earlier, it's speaking to a segment of podcasters that have sort of, it's feeding into a larger picture. Like they're trying to build their business, or it's another marketing channel for their business, or it's purely revenue generating. And those are the folks that are going to like reverse engineer it to say, what's popular? I'll do that. And what about the rest of us who are like out here having fun or doing something that's like a passion project? The advice does not translate to us, because they would tell me, oh, you should actually start up your social media accounts again. And I'm just simply not going to do it. I'm just not going to do that.
And this is where it gets honest.
Like you don't have to be in search of some greater success. It can just be about making the thing that you want to make. And there's so much value in that if you stay focused on that. And what I got out of this experience was like connecting with my friends in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do outside of this project. I mean, we've all cried a lot together, and there was something so therapeutic about the experience for me and the guests that like that's why I just get grossed out talking about the marketing of it all, because I'm like, that's not the point. The point was like, I helped my friends open up about stuff that I didn't know about them, that they don't talk about. And it's like transformed them emotionally, the process of telling the story and being vulnerable and then hearing it back after some edits and sort of cleaning it up for them and presenting it back. And some of these guests, after hearing themselves tell the story, it's like it has a really profound effect on them. And you're simply not going to get that experience if you don't put care into it. So if you're stretching yourself too thin and focusing on content creation and you got to be on this platform, you got to be on this platform, you lose sight of the like really intrinsic value of just making a creative project and what you can get personally out of that. And that's, I think, just so much more valuable than anything you could be doing on Instagram.
Maybe that's the metric. Not downloads, not funnels, not platforms. Just, did you make the thing you wanted to make? That's it for this episode of Monetize This. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.